This is the Jeff Santos Show on the Revolution Radio Network. Now, here's Jeff.
All right, we're going to take a quick transition here, and we'll get our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield on the phone with us. Again, we'll be talking to Doug McClain at about 7:45. We tried to put 3 guests into 1 hour. Not always easy to do, but we have a great producer, so that's how we can make it happen, folks. Just one more thing. Tomorrow night, Joe Williams will not be with us, but he is going to be on the premiere edition of the Jeff Santos Show that was taped yesterday on Free Speech TV. That will air on Sunday morning at 10 a.m. That is our permanent time slot. We are going to have representatives from Free Speech TV. We look to have them on Friday evening, and hopefully we'll try to take a little bit of some of the interviews that we have played on Free Speech TV and play them on the radio show as well. At least some clippets. Governor Mike Dukakis, Joe Williams, our great friend Elaine Cleeton, and Robert Craig also appeared on the show. And again, 10 a.m. Eastern Time on Monday. I should say on Sunday morning, in between Meet the Press and ABC with Stephanopoulos. Okay, time to go out to Seattle, WA. It is great to have our good friend, Mr. Mark Taylor-Canfield, the man who is the musician, the man who is the great journalist and the great activist. He is MTC. Mark, how are you, my friend? Happy Tuesday.
I'm doing good, Jeff. I've been in the studio recording our song about the Showbox, saving the Showbox Theater in Seattle, that iconic music theater that the developers want to demolish and replace with condos right there across from the Pike Place Market. So we're adding our voice to the campaign on that one. The musicians have been great on that issue. And we were talking about teachers and talked about, you gave a shout out to your teachers last week, and I did also to mine, my high school teachers especially. And I got to visit one of them. His name is Oscar Sisk, and he lives out on the beautiful Kitsap Peninsula here in Washington State on a beautiful lake, a wonderful place. And it's just good to see somebody who has devoted most of his life to public education, including some administration. He was also an assistant principal. It was great to see somebody enjoying his life and enjoying a good pension and getting what teachers deserve, because he did a lot for the community. So just wanted to throw that in there.
Well, you shouldn't, and they're the most important profession in the country. And we talk about education with Melissa, or our friends at AFT and other labor unions. It's so critical to talk about just that. So very, very important. Hey, we're going to have on Doug McClain coming up after you, and we'll talk a little bit about Seattle getting a hockey team. Any more news on that? They have a name yet, Mr. Canfield?
As far as I know, they don't have an official name yet. I'll double check on that, but I still like the Seattle Grunge. That's my idea of
that's cool.
a good name for the Seattle hockey team.
We have to play a little Nirvana and Pearl Jam for Doug. That's a great great stuff. All right, well, talk to me a little bit about what I hear, and I think you are calling the rise of West Coast Democrats. What is that? I think I know what it is. We had on Ro Khanna yesterday. Barbara Lee is a regular on the show from San Francisco. We got to get Miss Jayapal from your great city on, and I've had people on from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio and others. Talk to me about West Coast Dems.
Well, we just saw our freshman Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal on MSNBC.
Right.
Talking about the Kavanaugh nomination, and as a woman originally from South Asia, who's always been an immigrants' rights advocate since I've known her. I mean, she has developed a voice in the U.S. Congress, and for a freshman on with Nina Totenberg on MSNBC, that's an amazing thing. She definitely has a voice as a woman and as a person of color, and I think that's really great. So, and by the way, just while we're talking about this, 2 of the picks that Seattle Times say have gotten through the competition for the NHL team is the Totems and the Sockeyes. So that's what people are voting on right now, just to let you know. But
so this is just 2 of the potential names, but they're not limited to those 2, right?
Yeah, it's not an official competition or naming. It's just what the Seattle Times is doing. But back to the issue at hand, Jeff Merkley, who is the senator from Oregon.
Yes.
He has been
Excellent.
very outspoken on a number of very progressive issues, and it looks like some of these folks, including Merkley and even a few folks that we've heard of before, actually Kamala Harris of California, Senator Harris, and also the CEO of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, have been visiting certain states that are very important in the presidential primaries. And even the mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, has been making some trips in the New Hampshire area. So we're thinking, and so is the New Republic, where there's an article about this by David Saracen. We're watching this and we're thinking, hey, we might have some West Coast candidates for president of the United States, and they tend to be very progressive because that is the tradition out here on the West Coast. And they are, as they put it in the New Republic article, they have created a platform that is almost the polar opposite of Trump's xenophobia, bigotry, protectionism, and environmental carelessness. So this is more of a progressive slate of candidates. And who knows, Jeff? I mean, no one from the West Coast has ever won a Democratic Party presidential nomination. So we also have on this slate possibly our own governor here in Washington State, Jay Inslee. So these are the names that are floating around right now, and they all represent a big turn toward progressive politics in the Democratic Party, and definitely a West Coast point of view, which we've talked about plenty of times on progressive issues like $15 an hour minimum wage, legalization of cannabis, all gay rights.
Well, I want to stop you there because this goes right to the heart. And we'll get into this, but I want to get your immediate thoughts on this. Robert Craig and I talked about this. You heard today that Amazon has given their employees $15 an hour. They've been getting pummeled, and thanks to people like you in Seattle and other parts of the country going after them, Senator Sanders, Ro Khanna, who was on the show yesterday and a couple of weeks ago, has been talking about this. This, to me, is a big victory for progressives. So I think it goes right along with the progressive movement that you just talked about, Jayapal, Merkley, Harris. Oh, I'm a little bit concerned about some of her other views, but she has signed on with single payer. But there is a real need, I think, to sort of have these candidates out there. I mean, I think the closest that any Democrat has come was probably Jerry Brown, who ran 3 times. None of the times he really came close. But I think he's about the only one that, at least had a chance going in. Scoop Jackson, of course, from Washington State, wasn't that progressive. So this could be rather interesting if the Democrats could get somebody, from one of those 3 states on the Pacific Coast, because it is the sort of, the Cascadia, if you include San Francisco to Vancouver, and of course the people in Vancouver, British Columbia can't vote, unfortunately. I wish they could. But yeah, I think that there is a lot there, and I think you guys have proven it, and going after Jeff Bezos has been a great example. And of course, where is he? But, in the Washington Post and Whole Foods, where I've been reading about, people are being treated like robots who work at Whole Foods, or as some of my friends call it, whole paycheck. So what do you think about that, Mark?
Well, in general, as I mentioned before, there's been a lack of union representation in the tech industry in Seattle, so that's always been an issue. And as far as the slate of candidates, the only one that worries me really is Howard Schultz, because he immediately went on some major networks, and when the issue of single payer came up in the Democratic Party, and Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez was talking about it, and other folks like Bernie Sanders, well, he came out and said, well, we just can't afford that. I don't know where you're going to get the money. So unfortunately, on some of these issues, Mr. Howard Schultz, being the corporate guy that he is kind of, trying to drag his feet, and probably is not going to be out there on the forefront of issues like creating single payer, universal healthcare, Medicare for all type programs. He represents a little bit of the corporate wing of the Democratic Party where, we'd like that, but it's just not practical, and we're just going to wait a few more years, and, and it never happens kind of thing. So we'll see. I was surprised to see him come out so vociferously against single-payer health care. I mean, it just seems to be he seems to be bucking the trend in his own party. So.
Well, but I never really considered him serious or a candidate that I would even deem progressive. Yes, on civil rights issues after what happened at Starbucks, but that's just the thing. After what happened at Starbucks in Philadelphia and other places, to me, is a disgrace. So I don't know where he's coming from. I mean, he's obviously, a civic-minded individual, but again, like Bezos and Amazon.com, it's corporate coffee. I mean, what's wrong with mom and pop's, coffee shop? I mean, Starbucks and others, including Dunkin' Donuts here, have destroyed the local coffee shop. And
honestly, Jeff, I'm wondering, do we really need another billionaire?
Yes, exactly.
running for president? I don't know. I mean, I know Tom Steyer is out there too, and he made all sorts of indications. Even when I talked to him, he refused to say that he was not going to run for president. So, I mean, there have been, he's another
Californian, by the way.
Yes. And Silicon Valley and the tech industry does have something to do with this picture, I think. I mean, in some ways, they have been very progressive in terms of immigration issues and, Trump's ban and stuff like that. But also, I mean, there are some economic issues about serious income inequality and serious increases in housing costs in states like Washington and California. Or we can call ourselves progressive, but until the average working class folks can survive in these parts of the country, I mean, can we really say we're progressive?
Exactly. That's the part of the, I mean, if you remember the days, and I know that there are startups, but that's a little bit over the top now. People are working 18-hour days, no unions. There's been very, very few women CEOs, or if there has been, they haven't lasted very long in the tech industry. So I have a hard time looking at Silicon Valley, as anything that is progressive. Immigration, a few other issues, but I don't really consider that or our friends at Microsoft, leading edge. It's the people who are, they're not in Los Gatos where a lot of these companies are, or was it Bellevue where Microsoft is? I mean these.
Redmond, Washington.
Redmond. These small communities that are just, basically been taken over by these corporations. And according to, and the New Republic points this out, according to the Pew Research Center poll, 74% of Americans still think that technology companies have had a positive impact on their lives. So it may have ruined the city, but they've got their nice, computer and software to play with at home if they can find a place they can afford to live. So unfortunately, there's still this sense out in the country that these are very progressive players in our political scene, and I think that needs to be challenged because as we've seen here in Seattle, Amazon at one point with the affordable housing tax, the tax on corporations that make over $20 million per revenue a year to fund affordable housing. I mean, they were against it, and Jeff Bezos was against it. Because I want to take a quick commercial break. We'll come right back and continue this conversation with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield. It's the Jeff Santos Show, back in a flash.
Installing and repairing natural gas lines is no game. So why is National Grid gambling with public safety? National Grid locked out more than 1,200 union workers to force concessions, even while profits soar. Now the company is betting on your safety with inexperienced replacement workers. So we've asked 90 cities to suspend National Grid projects. It's all of our lives at stake.
Jimmy Rollins talks about the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Just being in the same place that all these great ball players reside at now, their career. You go find their stats, their jerseys, their helmets, their cleats, and have something of mine. That is something that anybody that goes to the Hall of Fame can see.
Preserving history, honoring excellence, connecting generations. At the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum in Cooperstown, New York. Connect with Cooperstown at baseballhall.org.
34 minutes past the hour. A little Eddie Vedder and Pearl Jam, of course, part of the great grunge sound of Seattle, WA. We are hearing maybe possibly that the new hockey team could be called a grunge. I love it. One big guitar on the jerseys, and you get all the 90s bands and Eddie Vedder and Dave Grohl to come out, do big events. I think it's a fantastic idea. We're continuing our conversation with Mark Taylor-Canfield. We'll be talking to our good friend Doug MacLean, former coach of the Panthers and GM of the Blue Jackets, about the upcoming NHL season, which starts tomorrow night. NHL, NBC, NBCSN, as it's called, the sports network, tomorrow night. Bruins and Caps, defending Cup champion Capitals. Mark, we were talking about, some of these big business corporations and so forth that emanate out of the West Coast. The good thing is that there is a lot of progressives to put pressure on them. And, I led off my show with the concept of we have to continue to put the pressure on Susan Collins and Flake. And we saw what happened last Friday morning when the two women, I think one from the Center for Public Democracy, I believe the name of the organization is Anna, who put their feet in front of the elevator, wouldn't let it close, and one of the women said, "Look at me, Senator Flake. I have been sexually assaulted. Look at me when I'm talking to you." Scolding him. And it's interesting because I like that idea of that they work for us. We pay their salaries. They are public servants. And they're not owned by corporate America, even though that's who they really serve. They don't really serve the majority of the American people. Not all of them, anyways. I think that was a stunning moment. I don't know how you felt about it 3,000 miles away, but
Absolutely.
That opened my eyes.
Yes, I love that video. I tweeted that out. We've had a pushback by the students, right, against the NRA. We've had a pushback now against some corporations who were resistant to $15 an hour minimum wage. And one thing that people should probably think about is that, according to the New Republic, more than 500,000 Californians work in renewable energy, which is exactly 10 times the number of coal miners in the entire country. So we're talking not only a political powerhouse, but also an economic powerhouse. If you're talking about California, also paradigm shifting, because the primaries, California is going to be earlier in the primaries, and that's going to make it much more of a pivotal player, in the presidential primaries. So watch out for California. There's a whole lot of votes and a whole lot of electoral votes in California, and it's always been a big player. But this year, or in 2018 or 2020, it could be even a bigger player. So there's something going on the West Coast. I agree with the writers at the New Republic, and you and I have been talking about it for a while. And it has been really instructive for me to see in my coverage how people like Jeff Merkley's name keeps coming up over and over again on all of the progressive issues. I mean, he always seems to be on the right side of the most progressive issues in the country. And the same, I guess we could say about Pramila Jayapal, our congresswoman from Washington State. Whenever I'm reading about progressive issues, whenever I'm watching or listening to progressive media, it's they're there. They're right in the middle of it. They're taking the lead on a lot of these issues. And so, hey, I think it's a trend that the Democrats should watch out for. I mean, we talked about how Bernie Sanders won every county in Washington State during the primaries. So watch out. I mean, there's a big progressive movement on the West Coast that's been here for a while, but I think it's just getting even more organized and more strident and more ready to fight, the establishment, wherever that establishment's coming from, whether it's Washington, D.C., or the Northeast or wherever, or the corporate Silicon Valley centers. I mean, it's the trend here in U.S. politics, and companies like Boeing or Microsoft and Google and Amazon and Starbucks, they're not going to be able to stand in its way. They might be able to work with it and change along with it, but they're not going to be able to stand in its way. It's just the nature of the West Coast, and it's the nature of doing business here. And I think we actually need to do a better job at holding these corporations accountable and pushing social and corporate responsibility, because they come into your community and they totally disrupt everybody's lives, and then, throw a couple $1 million at a charity and call it good. And I don't think that's good enough.
No doubt. We're talking with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield here on the Jeff Santos Show. I'm interested in what you saw on Thursday and Friday to a lesser extent in terms of reaction. How many people, in greater Seattle, in your world, were actually paying attention, would have been an early morning. I believe the hearing started, at 10 o'clock Eastern, so 7 a.m. I mean, were people getting up early to watch this, out there in Seattle?
Well, the news junkies were, and the writers and journalists like me and editors, but there were a lot of people who were able to catch segments of it later on in the day and when they got home from work. And I mean, I don't know, it's just anecdotal to say this, Jeff, but the impression I got is that people keep thinking that politics in the United States has reached the lowest depth possible, but then every day some new lower depth is reached, until it's just embarrassing and kind of shameful, the whole process of having to deal with these kinds of politicians and in this case, judge who just their ethics are highly questionable.
There's no doubt. I think they're just sleaze, and I think Kavanaugh is a part of the sleaze, part of the lying, part of the bullying as well, which I think has gone on. We saw, I think, the true nature of this individual come out in the hearings where he was trying to bully Senator Klobuchar, who's as nice a person as you can get, and others, Pat Leahy the same way, from Vermont. Minnesota nice, and it's hard to do that. Vermont nice too. Talk to me what you think. And I really feel that, what Bernie Sanders is up to. We hear Elizabeth Warren is thinking about running now. It came out the other day at a place just west of us where we are now in Holyoke, Massachusetts, talking about that idea of running for president. In your mind, will we see people, going to California, not only to raise money, because they always go to LA for that, but coming to San Francisco, Seattle, and Portland, probably 3 of the 6, 7, 8, 9 most liberal cities in the country, to sort of talk about this? Any word of Bernie coming to Seattle? Is he on his way?
I'm sure Bernie will be back in Seattle. I mean, he knows that he's very well loved and supported here. And he's also has a great relationship with our city council member, Shama Sawant, and also our Congresswoman, Jayapal. So, no, this is definitely, Bernie land. He can definitely relax when he comes to Seattle and be among friends. But, I just hope, all I can say about that, Jeff, is I just hope that the Democrats have learned their lesson and that they are paying attention to the need for real grassroots organizing and real door-to-door outreach in every community. And that includes minority communities where people of color largely get ignored. There needs to be big voter registration drives. And also, and this is something that doesn't get covered in the media much, unfortunately, or brought up much in the parties, is that there's we really need to be very careful about voting accountability in this country.
Oh yes, big issue. In fact, we're gonna be talking with our good friend Greg Palast a little bit later in the week, and Frank Watkins, who have worked together, Reverend Jesse Jackson's top policy director, about that issue. To me, it's a major issue, one of the more important ones. Over the next 4 weeks, we can't allow places like Ohio and Georgia and other places to stop, progressives from winning and people of color from winning, and that's exactly what they're looking to do. Mark, we'll talk to you next Tuesday, my friend. It's great to have you on. Thank you for adjusting your schedule for us today, and I love the Seattle grunge. I'll tell you that.
Well, it may end up being the totems, which is also something that I said I really supported, was some kind of reference to Native American culture. So, that's a good thing as well. I'll be happy. And if people want to find out more about what I'm doing, you can go to the MTC report at YouTube. We've got over 360 original videos there now, and radio,
awesome.
theater, and music videos, and animated political satire cartoons and all sorts of stuff. So there's plenty of things to keep you busy there. And I'll just keep at it here in Seattle, trying to push the envelope in terms of progressive politics, because I think that's where everything is headed and has been headed for a while. So I'm not surprised to see progressive, potentially very progressive candidates for president coming from the West Coast in 2020.
Mark, that's exactly the case. Thank you, my friend. We will talk to you next Tuesday. All the best.
This is the Jeff Santos Show on the Revolution Radio Network. Now, here's Jeff.
Hour 2 of the Jeff Santos Show starting right now. It is great to be with you here, folks, as we broadcast live from Assembly Row in Somerville, Massachusetts. Great 2 hour. We have 3 guests. We look forward to talking to Doug McClain, the NHL regular season tomorrow. Former Panthers coach and Blue Jackets GM will join us about 45 past. Mark Taylor-Canfield will join us at about 7:15. But we start this hour with a true fighter, true patriot, and, of course, she is one tough cookie. Melissa Tomlinson, badass teacher, is the best name in politics, joins us from the great Garden State of New Jersey. Melissa, great to have you back on. Happy Tuesday.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for having me again.
Anytime. It's great to have you on here. It's Tuesday, Teacher Tuesday with Melissa is a great day for me and for many others, too. All right. Well, all the news has been sucked into the Kavanaugh hearings. I know that you were watching them like a lot of other teachers. Of course, teachers have been victimized in so many areas, including, obviously, the issue of sexual assault and many others. But I want to talk to you about the impact of a Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, what that would mean to teachers in general. Your thoughts?
It's funny you asked me that, because a lot of people seem to be having a tough time making the connection of what a Supreme Court justice would mean to education. But the truth is, right now, it directly relates to education. I did some research on some stuff that Kavanaugh has been involved with in regards to education earlier in his career. And there's definitely a lot of reason for concern. In 1999, he wrote an amicus brief on the use of a PA system for student-led prayer. So he's as a person who would want to open up the door on that separation of church and state that we have right now. Also with, he wrote one on behalf of the Center for Equal Opportunity, which opposes race-based affirmative action in college admissions. Wow. So we have some of the work that they've been doing to kind of provide equity in our colleges and our institutes of higher learning. That is in jeopardy. And more importantly, because of the fact that we have Betsy DeVos in office, and she's already proven her agenda for school choice and for kind of allowing some of these predator loan companies to continue, he sides directly with her. So that's a concern as different lawsuits are coming up through the states and challenging the way we have protected our students and protected public education right now, that we would have another justice potentially seated who would rule against our students.
We're talking with Melissa Tomlinson here on the Jeff Santos Show. I'm intrigued by some of these issues, particularly about the issue of affirmative action, which, of course, is already something that Republicans are trying to go after. And again, every time you take an opportunity to give somebody an opportunity to get an education, you are creating more problems for people who need to get a pathway to success. And a college education is a guarantee to at least a successful opportunity to work. I mean, I pay you a lot, but a 4-year degree, the last time I checked, gets you out of the idea of a permanent unemployment situation, which if you have only a high school degree, that is usually a major problem. We found that out in the 2008 crisis. So you're so right on what this was about. And of course, Kavanaugh, comes from a Catholic school background. Let people know I went 8 years of Catholic school, 4 years of public university, and a private university. So I've done all three. And I can tell you, if you don't have some kind of public education, you really haven't lived, in a true melting pot or true diverse scenario. And this guy wants to basically, allow the private sector, the Catholic Church, which of course has had its own problems. And again, I grew up Catholic and still go to a very progressive church. The fact is that this is a scenario, in my view, which just creates more and more havoc for the country, and we can't afford to have this guy on the court. And what I would think, that he's going to uphold the Janus decision. He's going to uphold, the idea of allowing states and counties to have superintendents to rule the day. So all the status quo powers that are fighting you guys every day are going to only be made worse under a majority of conservatives in the Supreme Court and by a guy like Kavanaugh, who now has, the anger, which we saw the other day in front of millions of people, to actually try to have vendettas on the people who are bringing up these issues. Your thoughts there?
You tied it directly to where my thoughts led to next. You tied it to the Janus decision, right? So we had this monumental decision that has changed what unions look like in this country right now. So we're all kind of trying to sort that out. But we don't have a lot of time to sort it out. And that's the concern, because as soon as the Janus decision was announced, we saw 26 lawsuits against public sector unions that were filed in different states, attacking everything from fee statutes, collective bargaining agreements, exclusive representation. The companies and the organizations that have been trying to break the unions for years have not wasted any time in the follow-up, right? So as we're trying to regather ourselves in union organizing, the attacks are still coming. And as the court cases move up through the circuits and get to that Supreme Court level, to have Kavanaugh sitting as a Supreme Justice would be devastating.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt. It would create so many problems. Finally, as we come to the end of this segment, which we'll have Melissa on next week in her regular time period, is there any state that we are worried about right now under Republican rule for the most part? Sometimes there's some Democrats that you're concerned about, that we need to tell the American people, those listening tonight on RevolutionRadioNetwork.com, streaming audio around the world, that you're concerned about, Melissa?
So everything's been focused on the elections, and we've been watching different aspects of the elections, everything from local elections to congressional seats, right? We've been watching ballot votes. We're watching a ballot vote in Hawaii right now, structured around school funding. We're definitely keeping a close eye on the governor's race in Georgia and in Florida. In New Jersey, we have a couple key races that are looking tight. And that's actually what I was doing tonight before I got on the phone with you, is that I was involved in a legislative action meeting through my union, and a member spoke up and quite succinctly said, people need to start recognizing that this is how you get the most money out of your union dues, is by getting involved and giving your voice to the decisions and uplifting all the voices together. So, there's so many things going on, and keeping track of all the different races, it's definitely going to be a lot of sorting out after the elections, and as we start making appointments with the newly elected legislators to make sure our voices are heard.
Melissa Tomlinson, if people want to reach you, how do they do so via the web?
So our website is badassteacher.org, and all of our contact information is right on there. And we also have a Facebook page and a Twitter feed to follow. Badass Teacher A.
Fantastic. Keep on fighting, Melissa. It is so great to have you on. We'll look forward to talking to you next week and in the coming weeks as well. All the best, my friend. Thank you.
Have a good night.
You as well.